Dr. Janji?
Sorry, Chairperson, I just want to clarify. I think I might have added, I spoke on behalf of the Chairperson of FFC, and I think it's unfair. I just making conversation there. I think Dr. Baba can come in. I just assumed that what I was saying was quite necessary, but could you please give Dr. Baba and the colleagues on FFC to also comment on that? So, thanks so much.
Dr. Baba?
No, thank you so much, Chairperson. Dr. Yankees, I'm quite happy with the arrangements that you are proposing, that we present our slots and then the committee can consider questioning us afterwards. Thank you, Chairperson.
Before the presentation of PBO? Because the plan was that you both present, then questions will come after.
Yes, that's fine.
Are you comfortable? Okay.
Yes, I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay. I think it's 9 o'clock, a minute past 9 now. Do we form a quorum, Babado?
Yes, Chairperson, we do form a quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Members, good morning. Good morning, honorable members. You are welcome.
Morning, Chair.
Morning. Members from our guests from the provinces. I've spoken to the honorable member from Eastern Cape. We have invited all 9 provinces and we have not received the apology. I hope the chairpersons are here or members of the committees are here. Those who are on the platform, you are welcome. And please feel free to participate, engage with the presentations. Before us, we have 2 presentations from FFC and PBO. Can we find out from Secretariat if there are any apologies? At some stage, I might switch off my video because ESCOM might decide to go away. We might experience load shedding. So we had 7-hour load shedding yesterday. Honorable member, Mr. Nodata.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, we don't have any apologies for this meeting. The committee forms a quorum.
Okay, I think we need to note the apology of Honorable Neta. She's off sick. I'm not sure as to until when or when will she come back to work. Can we note that?
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. We were not aware of that information. Thanks, Chair. We will just continuously have a recurring apology for her until we are informed otherwise.
Yeah, I'll also check on her off the line.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank
you. No apologies. Can we then step to item number 3? Presentation by Financial Fiscal Commission and Fiscal Commission on Division of Revenue. Dr. Mbaba, your hand is before Dr. Mbaba. Dr. Janji, your hand is still up.
I do apologize. It's an old hand, so I do apologize. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Mbaba and your team, thank you so much for honoring the invitation. Your presentation is really appreciated at all times, more especially on the division of revenue that we are dealing with, B22 of B17 of 2022. I think I'm correct with the numbers there. Dr. Mbaba, the stage is yours.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Sorry, my dear. We would like to. I would like to give you 30 minutes at most. I think it will cover your presentation. I looked at the slides that you're having. If you can just please be within the 30 minutes so that we can also allow you to attend to the other commitments. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chairperson. Good morning, members and Chairperson of the Select Committee on Appropriations. It's a great pleasure for the FFC to be here to present our thoughts on the fiscal framework and the revenue proposals, as well as the appropriation bill for 2022. Chairperson and members, our presentation will cover those items. We'll also discuss the 2022 Division of Revenue Bill at provincial level and local government. And we'll also share our thoughts on balancing economic and social recovery with ensuring sustainable public finances. I will then come in at the end, Chairperson and members, with more comments and final remarks. I would like now to hand over to our head of research to give a contextual background and the researchers to give an analysis of the bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbaba. Before he comes in, can I make a special request? It's something that we usually do as a house rule. There's a request from communications and IT that our meeting is live and they will request that we switch on our videos. Thank you, if possible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chen, the request is that all the researchers on our side, as they present, may they please switch on their cameras, as well as yourself as you present. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and greetings to you and to the House Select Committee. I think just in terms of background, and as we have seen this presentation, especially the introduction previously, so may this, where we are now at in terms of NCOP and in terms of Select Committee, may the committee now be reminded that in our annual submission for this year, the 2022-23 Division of Revenue, tabled almost 10 months ago, we concluded with evidence that it is improbable that the economy will return to pre-pandemic productivity levels in the short term due to both standing and emerging risks on both the supply and demand sides of the economy, both domestically and internationally. More specifically, the devastating effects of the escalating inflation and unemployment structurally that depreciate and eliminates, respectively, our households, our people's purchasing power to survive. With the official fourth quarter 2021 GDP data that just came out last week, sadly, our inferences that was made 10 months ago are now proven accurate and likely. South Africa's economy, despite growth, has yet to recover the productivity loss due to the COVID and the civil unrest, and comparable to a level at the moment, GDP-wise, last witnessed in 2017 in real terms. Notably, the industry, as was shown in the latest quarter, was that our industry of electricity, gas, and water supply continue to be our Achilles heel to our economic growth. Earlier already, as members and chair, and all of us experienced the devastating effects of load shedding and so forth. And imagine that impact is also felt for all businesses and households across the country. And as was down, the fourth quarter 2021, back to the stats, is down by 3.4%, with productivity hampered by those infrastructure problems, structural problems. I now hand over to my team to take you through the submission on the 2022 divisional revenue. However, starting first, of course, always looking at the size and shape of the pie for the division, because there's no point in trying to cut it however many times a zero, it's still a zero. The fiscal revenue, Sianda, if you please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to Chairperson and honorable members. And I'll take you through the next few slides and hand over to my other colleague to continue with the presentation. So what we see is that a consolidated budget deficit of 6% is projected for the 2022-23 financial year, which then narrows to 4.2% of GDP in 2024. But more worryingly, what we see is that the debt servicing cost will now exceed 300 billion per year. That is starting from 2022-23 financial year. And it is becoming the fastest growing spending item. And the worry here, it's also worrying in the sense that with a rise in inflation, which is always followed by a rise in interest rates, then this increases interest costs that the government has to pay on the debt. And to do that, the government at some point must, to pay for the high interest cost, must either raise tax revenues or cut spending, or by credibly promising to do so in the future. And this also is also worrying in the sense that we have a narrowing tax base due to the high unemployment, which also puts, in a way, a pressure on public spending. Next slide. And then what we see here when we look at the allocations by economic classifications, we see that capital payments, which in a way capital payments captures government's contribution to capital formation, that is on the spending on new infrastructure as well as upgrades. We see that over the MTF, it then grows at an average of 12.2%. And then we see capital transfer, which is different from capital payments, but also focuses on capital formation, is growing at an average of 7.2%. But worrying also is the rise in employee compensation, which is growing over the MTF at 1.8%. Next slide. When we look at allocations by functional classification, what we see over the MTF is that most of the functions are decreasing over the MTF, although they are increasing in the upcoming fiscal year, but over the MTF they decrease. So we see that the learning and culture decreases by a negative 1.1%. And the social development decreases by 2.5%. So we only have the community development and the economic development, which are increasing over the MTF. And what we note that these budget cuts that we see over the MTF must consider the effect these cuts will have on employment. So there is a need to balance between the budget cuts and ensuring that we also preserve employment such that we don't add to the unemployment problem. Next slide. And then when we look at the tax revenue or the tax revenue and proposals, we note that there are no tax increases in the immediate, but we also note that the gross tax revenue for 21-22 is above what was projected. But we also note the proposed revision of the company tax, that although the idea is to bring investment, there needs to be further investigations in terms of what else or what other factors must be considered to make sure that these decreases in taxes ultimately do bring investment. So we welcome the tax relief. It will help with consumers' expenditure, but we do want that in the future, given the debt servicing cost and other spending pressures, there might be a consideration of tax increases. Next slide. I'll hand over to Sasha, my colleague, to continue with this section of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sianda, and good morning Good morning, Chair, members of the committee and other colleagues. I'm trying to put my video on, but I'm having some issues. If I can perhaps just, okay, I think it's on now. The next three slides emphasizes some highlights from the 2022 appropriation bill. So looking more at those national departments. And in total, the 2022 appropriation bill will allocate just over R1 trillion across the 41 votes for the 2022-23 financial year. When we compare that amount to the revised estimate for 2021-22, this represents an increase of 3%. But when we look further across the years of the medium-term expenditure framework, we see that the positive growth that is being projected for 2022-23 will not be maintained the year thereafter. So in 2023-24, those national departments will again see widespread reductions and in instances slower growth. Across the national departments, the largest allocation is to the social development vote. And there are three key developments that drive the increases to the social development vote over the MTF. And the first is the extension of the social relief of distress grant for another 12 months. And this comes at a cost of 44 billion, which has been enabled by the revenue windfall that was experienced. The other two developments relate to the adjustment to the child support grant, which will be expanded to include double orphans. And the third development in the sector will be the linking of the social security grants to inflation. Generally, the Commission supports these interventions. We believe that it will bring much needed relief to poor and vulnerable households who rely on social security grants. Especially given the detrimental effects of the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years. Regarding the permanent replacement of the SRD grant, the Commission notes the process is underway to identify a sound alternative. And for the Commission, one of the central considerations that should be kept in mind when evaluating the viability of any replacement will be the long-run effect that it would have on the sustainability of the fiscus. If we move to the next slide, please. The other area of funding that has benefited from the revenue windfall is higher education, where an additional 32.6 billion will be transferred through this vote to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And the funding will be used to continue support for existing bursary holders and to provide funding for new entrants into the system. And here the Commission would like to highlight the fact that providing bursaries to students is not a temporary or a once-off type of support. It does create a future funding obligation, at the very least over the short to medium term. Thus, due consideration must be given to government's ability to sustain this level of funding over the medium term. If we do not see any recovery in revenue, the departments that are spearheading these increases, in this case, higher education and training, the budgets of these departments will come under severe pressure come 2023-24. We do, however, note that according to the budget review, a new higher education funding model will be introduced in 2023. So we await the contents of this new funding model. The other key vote is the basic education vote. We note nominal increases over the next 3 years, but of course what is more important is what happens at the provincial education level, since that is where the actual delivery of education is located. Staying with the basic education sector, we note additional funding aimed at assisting the provinces with addressing the shortage of teachers. Again, the point of creating future funding obligations. And the sector will come under significant pressure if revenue is not, if we do not see a recovery in revenue next year. We also note the increase to the cooperative governance vote, which is one of the key drivers of growth in total allocation by vote. In respect of this vote, we see an additional 28.9 billion allocated. It's largely directed at transfers to municipalities in the form of the local government equitable share allocation. And given the role of municipalities in the delivery of free basic services to indigent households, the Commission supports the protection of this pool of funding. Moving to the next slide, please. Now, alongside the increased funding for the various social protection programs, government has also utilized the additional revenue to improve funding to economic development related departments. And this funding is largely in respect of infrastructure investment. And the notable allocations in this regard include an additional 5.3 billion to the water and sanitation vote, largely to fund regional bulk infrastructure. And then also to the transport vote, where, amongst other things, 45.3 billion will be allocated to address the backlog in upgrading and refurbishing the national non-toll road network. On these two aspects, the Commission supports the targeting of funding towards economic development. But whilst we support it, we also note that the key will be the rollout of these infrastructure departments, of these infrastructure projects by these departments. As we know, there are long-standing issues with respect to infrastructure management, which can inhibit the possible gains that can be derived from infrastructure investment. So the key there will be the implementation of those projects. If I may please go to the next slide. Thank you. So overall, the Commission supports government's decision to prioritize funding for social protection and economic development, but we stress the need to keep in mind the temporary nature of the increased funding and be aware that in some instances, the additional funding in 2022-23 will create future funding obligations in certain sectors, and should revenue not recover, these sectors will be under significant pressure over the rest of the MTF period. So we would advise departments to be aware of this potential threat and to be proactive in devising contingency plans to fund commitments should the need arise. We would also like to emphasize the need for finalizing the new higher education funding model with haste and in time for the 2023 financial year. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to my colleague Eddie.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Good morning, honorable members. If I could, may I please switch off the video because I'm on a very unstable network. I'll proceed with your permission, Chairperson. I'm
struggling to hear you, Eddie.
Yeah, the network is a little bit very poor.
Shaky. Okay, you can switch off your video.
Yeah.
It's fine.
All right. Okay, thank you. So there are two issues coming out of the provincial government allocations. Mainly, the first one is the issue of stagnation in the provincial allocations. And the second one would be the alignment between reprioritization of conditional grants and the overall long-term developmental goals of the country. So what we're seeing in the budget for 2022, there's a 682 billion that is allocated to provinces, which amounts to almost 2 trillion over the medium-term expenditure framework. But when you make a comparison between where these allocations were in 2021, that is the pre-COVID allocations, and where we are currently sitting, there is almost some kind of a recovery, but which is almost like increasing at a very declining rate. So that's why we see the stagnation in the allocations to provinces. And the implication thereof, of course, is that there's going to be cuts in the services that is being provided by the provinces. And what has happened in this particular specifically is that because of the protracted consolidation, which have been mainly affecting provinces, we've seen in the main province cutting expenditure on the appointment of teachers, also learner support material. So there's been 53 billion which has been added to the provincial equitable share formula to help provinces to acquire or to hire more teachers, but also to deal with the LTSM shortages which have had happened as a result of the consolidation that has happened over the past 10 years or so. There's also a bit of money which has been added to help with the hiring education assistants, but also to strengthen COVID-19 responses. The one point that we really want to emphasize with respect to the hiring of education assistants is that in some reports, there has been indication that there is no clarity as to what these education assistants are supposed to be doing. Of course, this is part of presidential employment program, but there's got to be much more clearer objective as to what they are going to be doing, so that the budget can be, if some provinces don't necessarily need education assistance, the budget can be directed to areas where there is most delivery shortages. Now, in respect of conditional grants, what we're seeing there again is that there's a bit of a catch up to the pre-COVID-19 levels, but also the growth is very slow. As we know, most of the cuts mostly were emitted on infrastructure conditional grants. So we're seeing them starting to recover to the pre-COVID-19 levels, but again, the recovery is very small. Average growth of total conditional grants over the pandemic period is 6% in nominal terms. So when you factor inflation, literally what we see is that there's zero growth in those allocations. In as much as we see recovery, there is zero growth. So cost increases associated with the delivery of infrastructure, it means that they are not being accommodated because of this. And of course, we understand because it's the economic environment that it is. So it means that at the provincial level, there must be the necessary adjustment to ensure that the resources which are being allocated are aligned to the delivery requirements. Next slide, Jen. The next slide really is just to show the story of the stagnation that I've just spoken about. If you look at the graph here showing the budget in 2020 relative to where it is today, so the conditional grant allocations, for instance, would have been, the PS allocation would have been about 200 billion in 2020, and then when you see at the graph, it's almost like it's flat over the 2-year or the 3-year budget cycles. So, which is essentially the story that we are making about the stagnant allocation, which means that there should be significant fiscal adjustment at the provincial level because the national budget cannot be able to help with with recovering the lost allocations. Now, in that sense, the Commission therefore recommends that provinces must identify selected delivery indicators and provide assessment of the service levels using the 2020 financial year as a point of reference to determine the impact of the stagnant allocation on service delivery, but also to ensure that when there is sufficient, when the resources eventually come back, they will be able to target where the impact has been most severe in terms of the service delivery. And this assessment must also incorporate provincial conditional grants delivery targets set out in the Division of Revenue Act in comparison to the current year of assessment, which would be 2020, 2022 or 2023. Next slide. The next slide here is just to indicate the conditional grant allocation, the trend line in the allocations. In the main here, what we'd like to note is mainly the Human Settlement Development Grant, which over the years has really been cut significantly to the tune of about 7 billion or 5.7 billion or so, 7 billion or so. Now, the implication of that cut, of course, is because there are some tasks now. With those cuts, it means that you elongate the time within which you're going to address those backlogs. And again, understandably, it's a function of the constrained economic environment that we find ourselves in. But the point we'd like to make here is that there is a need to link these cuts alongside to align these cuts alongside the country's long-term development goals. And what by that, if with specific reference to the agriculture conditional grants, if you look at the ILIMA and CAS, which are the two main agriculture conditional grants, the allocations to those two grants have been very minimal. Yet when you look at the infrastructure, the economic recovery plan, the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, it identifies agriculture as one of the key levers for job creation, but also to support growth going forward. Now, when you look at the allocations versus those the vision that is being articulated in the ERP, almost don't see that alignment. And the emphasis we'd like to make is that going forward, we need to improve this alignment between the long-term objectives with allocations that are made through the conditional grants. And lastly, with respect to the infrastructure, the HIV and malaria program. Again, this program, one of the points that we've identified earlier to this committee was that there's quite a number of sub-components associated with this particular grant, and we actually see growth again in this particular program. But what we're pointing out is that going forward, those sub components within the HIV grants needs to be done away with, so that we can improve the focus of this particular grant, the focus on prevention rather than the curative measures which have been prioritized with the new grants that is being added to this particular grant. Next slide. In conclusion, Chairperson, as I've already mentioned, the main issue that is coming out of this section in particular is the need to ensure that there is consistent monitoring of the delivery indicators and see what the impact has been of this concerted budget cuts to provinces, and therefore make sure that going forward we know where we allocate, where the resources, where the impact on delivery has been severe. And the second one is that in light of the 24.6 billion that has been added to the provincial equitable share formula to the education department, especially to address teacher shortages and also learner support material, is that we need to consider the carry-through cost of this budget of this delivery obligations, because should the revenue not recover for the following year, it means the baseline for the equitable share would not be able to rise, and therefore provinces would not be able to fund the teachers which would have been appointed as a result of the additions that are made to the provincial equitable share. Thanks, Chairperson. Let me hand over to my colleague Namonde.
Can't hear Eddie anymore. Is it only me? Can members hear Eddie?
Yeah, he was so fine at the end.
Yes, I've heard him say.
Yes, we do, Chair.
Okay, I think he was cut off. If it's only me and you can hear him, it's fine.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I may take over from Eddie.
Okay.
In looking at the local government division of revenue this year, there has been some additions, especially on the local government equitable share portion of the division. But however, noting that this year is the first year after the great political shift in the political landscape last year with the election, and then that resulted in many of the councils having hung councils. So politically and of course economically, it is worth a consideration, because we always say politics drives economics. All these changes are taking place against the backdrop, of course, of the COVID-19. You remember, Honorable Chair members, that during the COVID-19 or at the advent of it, onset of it, there were great shifts there in terms of shifting money away from other spheres, also incurring over expenditures to add additional resources onto the local government sphere.
Sorry.
Eddie, can you close, or someone's mic is on?
Thank you, Chair.
Can you the mic except for the speaker?
Thank you very much, Chair. So in addressing some of these challenges, the Commission notes and welcomed the review of the local government capacity building system, which started around 2021 with its implementation envisaged to kickstart in 2023. We are of the view that such initiative will enhance and improve the municipal performance at the ground level. In terms of the implementation. However, that is also as being the, shall we say, the great challenges there when we bring the policies and initiatives from paper onto the ground. Another welcome development in the local government sphere is strengthening their own revenue through development charges, although this should not be a distraction from what the local government, the main envelope in terms of providing basic services and the charge and the levies and the charges therein that serves and as the foundation still for majority of the local municipal own revenue source. And as well as also in the same light, we welcome this approach, the own sort of municipal revenue mobilization initiative. However, we are reminded again that in line with our submission of revenue research done for 2020-21, that this initiative should be done together or in synchronized, in coordinated fashion with the district development model, which seeks to address those and to improve the local economic development. This is to look at essentially the equitable share for the local government, and essentially we see this over the MTF. There is an envisaged increase for especially on the equitable share portion, as you see in the blue bar, and then as well as conditional grants. However, we note that whilst we are looking at that over the MTF, we should look at where we are currently in terms of the revised budgets. So one of the key concerns, especially in implementation and for local governments, some of the 257, quite many of those recipients, is that when they spend money, do they spend it in full? Because if it comes back as underspending, which has always been the issue for the local government sphere, then that money is again wasted in its purpose and its value. Moving on, this is another look, except looking at the margins or the rate of change between years of the various allocations. And again, we see there's a huge rise envisaged for the equitable share. We are, however, concerned for the conditional grants, as most of the conditional grants in the local government sphere is infrastructure related to do with basic infrastructure and services. And so it is quite concerning that the growth for other very important, those infrastructure build grants is seemingly declined. So the interactions and the interrelatedness use of between equitable share and conditional grants in the local government sphere is something to be monitored and evaluated as we move forward over the MTF. And so here, lastly, looking at again the different grant types, we see this sort of tapering off of in terms of growth for those conditional grants, as we raised that concern, the various and concerned earlier. We shan't go into the specifics, but again, it's just that underspending issue for these grants. So it is not without justification that these grants were moderated. However, we are, however, of the view that these reductions that does send a negative signal, and it is very clear that when we send something of a signal, always are very careful and very clear with the reasons and the whys. And it will be a challenge, of course, for 257 municipalities, as they all have different, essentially different use and reasons and the challenges faced for implementing these grants. So it's important that when we communicate those signals, positive or negative, that they are well informed so that they may implement those grants frameworks. In essence, in some of the recommendations is that we welcome the government's efforts to keep the local government equitable share growth above inflation, and it will go a long way in offsetting the ever increasing cost of basic services. and enable delivery. We also note and welcome the review of that capacity building systems and infrastructure grants. The Commission, we also further stress that in view of those changes and reviews and initiatives for local economic growth and development, is that we looked at what we've said its governments in terms of the district development model. It's no use to have so many plans and models where we don't make them all link up, so that essentially building on the shoulders of giants rather than everybody working in silos. Lastly, the Commission stresses that municipalities must improve the efficiency of spend. Earlier we said and saw that there is a lot of underspending in the sector, and so that it would be important to not just keep throwing in the budget, throwing in the money, but rather really follow on the expenditure review programs and adjust the program, adjust the budget accordingly to make the responsive budgeting. And lastly, let me hand back to Eddie and then the chair. Eddie.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
You don't have the luxury of time anymore.
Yeah.
Just,
okay. I'll
consider that.
I'll try to be brief. Okay. So the last section, Chairperson and honorable members, you would have heard a number of pre and post analysis of the budget. We're asking what was the overall fiscal stance of the budget, whether it was supporting growth, it was emphasizing fiscal stability, or it was promoting social stability. Now, in the Commission's view is that those objectives are not mutually objectives, and there's quite a number of lessons that we can take from the approach that the government took in respect of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, in which the approach was three-pronged, mainly to overcome the health crisis, to protect the livelihoods, and to support businesses. So there have been a number of initiatives, I won't go into them, that were introduced at that time, which were very much synchronized. And in the sense, we are of the view that that is a very a good approach. Must I go into this condition, Chair?
Apologies, Chairperson.
No, I will. Let me just. Yeah, Chen, let me just quickly.
Chair, Dr. Mbaba.
Yeah, let me just quickly conclude as we don't have the time on our side. Thank you so much, Chairperson and members. In conclusion then, members, the Commission supports Budget 2022 and government's continued commitment to consolidating public finances while providing support for the pandemic response, job creation, and social protection. There are three areas we want to emphasize, our members, is that in terms of South Africa's growth prospects, the Commission's view is that it is improbable that the economy will return to pre-pandemic production levels within a year. Regarding revenue and tax policy, the Commission supports government's approach of focusing on broadening the tax base, improving administration, and lowering tax rates. The Commission further welcomes government's decision to use a portion of the revenue windfall to lower the gross borrowing requirements and reducing debt issuances. However, the Commission cautions that debt stabilization risks remain elevated and pose significant challenges to public finances. Finally, members, the Commission supports the decision to use the revenue windfall to improve pro-poor and growth-inducing allocations in non-interest spending over the MTEF. We believe that this approach must not rather jeopardize the path to deficit reduction and fiscal consolidation. However, it should be noted, members, that certain elements of funding within Budget 2022 will create future funding obligations, such as the NSFAS funding for low-income students, as well as the hiring of teachers. Should the revenue not recover, this will place the partners under significant pressure. Thank you so much, Chairperson and members, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Team FFC. We will come back with the engagement on your presentation. I will now request Team PBO, led by Dr. Janji, to do their presentation. 30 minutes at most. I know FFC, you took few minutes after your time has lapsed, but it's fine. You have highlighted very important issues that are empowering us. Team PBO, Parliamentary Budget.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Good morning to honor members. Good morning to colleagues on the platform. Thank you for the opportunity to give the input. We'll try to see if we can stick to the time allocated. This is our presentation outline. I'm with the team, Chair. I know that we've got colleagues from the province and honor members from the provinces, just to emphasize. I'm with the team who will take us through the presentation. I will quickly do the introduction and give to the team to take us through. Luvalo, go to the next slide, please. I think this slide just summarizes, say, our mandate that we establish support these committees related to the money bills. But I think to emphasize that our presentation will mainly focus on the provincial revenue. And our wish is that the committee would give us some opportunity again in the coming few weeks to give input on the appropriations bill in this regard. Our presentation really, Chair, provides some of the thinking around the roles and responsibility about various stakeholders in the DORA itself, but more importantly also to share some of the needs that societal and economic needs that the DORA is meant to support the spheres of government and also look at the changes that happened in the current year vis-a-vis the prior years, but also look at the provinces and the local government spheres, in particular conditional grants. On the next slide, thank you so much. I think here, the next slide, I think we also want to emphasize the purpose of the Act itself, that it looks at how the revenue raised nationally is divided among the three spheres, and we're also looking out to years, but also looking at some of the roles or what each province will be able to get in that regard, and focus on the municipality and provincial government shares, which and conditional grants, which form part of their allocation or division in that regard. But I think to emphasize a few points, I know other colleagues have emphasized also around the constitutional requirements in terms of some of the consideration to be given when the revenue is divided by these spheres, in particular, the need to ensure that the provinces and the municipalities are able to provide the basic services and perform the functions as allocated in the Constitution and other provisions, but also the fiscal capacity and efficacy of the provinces and municipalities in that regard, but also having some emphasis on developmental needs, but also able to allow predictability of the fiscal contestations or fiscal allocation over time. The next slides. So these are some of the provisions that are quite clear provisions, but I emphasize a few of them there, which are quite also important, and others are important. I think in this slide, in giving context again, Chair and members, just to show some of the functions and mandate of the spheres, and also take into account that some of these functions are core functions, are co-shared by some of these spheres, particularly local government and province there. So the division of revenue really enables these spheres to address some of these mandates that are given from the provisions thereof. The next slide, which is the last slide from myself, just to show that there has been some changes when you particularly look at the local government. There have been some additions. It's really reflected when you compare with the prior year allocations in this regard, but also to show that how much of the division of revenue is conditional grants for both the other spheres. And it's important in a way, looking at some of the issues we've raised over the years with the analysis of the use of conditional grants, to understand that it forms part of the major allocation spheres in this regard. Chairperson and other members and colleagues, I'll just give now to the team I think Ms. Lucy Sibek will take us through the needs that the Division of Risk and intended to address in this regard. Thank you so much. Lucy, you can take us through.
Yes.
Thanks.
Good morning, honorable members and guests and colleagues. I'll be taking us through the situational analysis and the needs that we have written about in the submission. So looking first at the national sphere of government, it is critical to acknowledge that at the national sphere, what is important is the provisioning of social protection and safety and security. And of course, these are the two largest expenditure functions at that level. This function, of course, includes programs at income protection, social welfare, and also supports women, youth, and persons with disabilities. And of course, as we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis, social protection in particular has become, a point of deep consideration. As of the end of September 2021, there were 18.5 million social grants paid to 11.5 million beneficiaries. Social development estimated that approximately 13.2 million people will be eligible to receive the special COVID-19 SRD grant in 2021-22. And of course, this needs to be related to the increasing unemployment, poverty, and inequality that we've experienced during this COVID-19 pandemic. And these grants, when we desegregate it, we look 5.8 million beneficiaries based on previous grant recipients as of March 2021, and about 7.4 million of these are caregivers who had actually initially been excluded in the previous rounds. So next slide, please. So of course, we continue to be concerned around the corruption in the public and private sectors, which makes it difficult, for national and all areas of government to undertake what is meant to be done to be able to change the circumstances of our country. The COVID-19 pandemic has in particular highlighted or heightened the vulnerability of certain groups, of course, women in particular, and children, when we look at the exposure to gender-based violence and femicide. And of course, because security or safety is an important consideration at national, it's important that we are conscious of the numbers of crime that are happening. We're looking at 9.5 thousand people being raped between July and September 2021. There's 70+ thousands of common assaults, over 6,000 people killed, and all these crime statistics that, of course, make safety a deep concern in our country. Next slide, please. In terms of the provincial sphere, we know that education and health are the largest expenditure functions here, and about 3 million children between 0 and 4 accessed ECD services by March 2021. Just to give you a context, there are currently 5.7 million children in South Africa between the ages of 0 and 4. So this is, still quite far off from the number of children we actually have. Even our target falls below, the number of children in 2022 who should be in these ECD centers. Enrollment for children ages 5 to 6 in school or ECD centers has grown, which is a positive consideration. And of course, we continue to struggle in terms of our math and science results in schools. So something to also think about deeply, and whether this budget enables for us to improve some of those indicators. Next slide, please. In terms of the provincial sphere, health is also another critical consideration. And I think what is quite alarming here is to note that between 2019 and 2020, we've actually regressed in some of our key indicators. So yes, we've improved in life expectancy over the last couple of years, and our target is 70 years by 2030. We were at 65.5 years in 2020, so that is a good indication of moving towards the target. But at the same time, when we look at infant mortality rates, they actually increased between 2019 and 2020, something to be deeply concerned about as a critical indicator for health outcomes. And as well as under 5 mortality rate, something, we need to think about the ecosystem of health and what are the driving factors that lead to this. For example, in terms of infant mortality rate, one of the leading causes is underweight at birth, which requires us to look differently at what is needed in terms of budgetary allocations to deal with that. Next slide, please. I'll now pass on to my colleague, Tshepo Moloi, to take us over local government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Chairperson, honorable members, I'll be taking you briefly through these slides on local government, which we all know plays a critical role as the first line of interaction between government and its citizens. Now, between 2004 and 2016, the country has certainly seen a rapid rise in service delivery protests, and this owes to the dissatisfaction with service delivery. We also know that the poor service delivery also has a disproportional impact on different households along racial, gender, and geographic lines. Likewise, COVID-19 has also brought to the fore the centrality of social reproduction. This relates to household duties such as cooking, childcare, elderly care. Now, these activities are usually, or they are disproportionately undertaken by women and girls, and are somewhat also exacerbated by the lack of access to basic services. Moreover, we do know that these vital households' duties are also regarded as unpaid work and not measured in indicators such as the GDP, meaning that the poor service delivery means that more time doing unpaid work, and this also certainly affects women's participation, labor market participation. Next slide, please. Now, the statistics contained in the 2019 non-financial census of municipalities report all points to a significant decline in the provision of free basic services, be it when you look at access to free basic water, sewage, sanitation, as well as electricity services. But also at the same time, we also know that millions of households are often faced with this trade-off between the buying of food or paying for the ever-increasing municipal services. What's also quite interesting is the research from the Public Affairs Research Institute that makes two important findings. The first finding being that for more than 2 decades, local government has not been able to fulfill its conflicting objectives of, on one hand, charging affordable tariffs to ensure universal affordable access to quality services, whilst at the same time ensuring that they remained financially viable. The second key finding was that millions of households that were eligible for free services do not get them simply due to a dysfunctional system for the registration of indigent households. Next slide, please. Now, this slide simply looks at the challenges to service delivery more broadly, and we're simply saying that the financial and operational challenges that often hinder local government from delivering services are often correlated or closely related, and that the failure to adequately address these challenges certainly has got an immense causes immense hardship to citizens and also has a detrimental impact on social and economic development. Now, when you look at the literature on local government, much of this literature suggests that the poor performance, which often leads to service delivery, is due to a combination of factors, issues around capacity constraints, which would also relate to skill shortages. You've got poor planning, ineffective financial management, poor M&E, especially in the context of poor governance and corruption. Now, linked to this, and more importantly, is also the lack of up-to-date data. You'd recall that in 2021, Stats SA did indicate that they would be suspending the detailed household survey, and simply this was due to the budget cuts. Now, without this critical information, certainly data-driven policymaking will be undermined. Now, finally, the performance and financial audits by the Auditor General also points to serious service delivery problems within local government. In their last report, they reported that only 28% of municipalities submitted credible financial statements for audit, and this was for the 2019-20 financial year, and that the number of municipalities that were in financial distress rose from 86 in 2013-2014 to 175 in 2019-20, and more worryingly was that 123 municipalities had passed unfunded budgets. I'll hand over to Rashad. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, earlier on, and honourable members, we presented the division of revenue for this current year and over the MTEF. Whilst it's useful to do so and to consider the current MTEF, it's also useful to consider the context for the division of revenue. So given the country's evolving socioeconomic needs, increasing expectations placed on the state to provide more, both at all 3 levels of government, and also in the context of COVID, in the context of low growth, it's important to consider the context. So this slide over here shows you the division of revenue from 2008-9 right through till the outer year of the current MTEF. And the most obvious inclusion over here, or shown over here, is the declining share of provincial government and national government, and the rising share of local government over the medium term. Now, over the historical period, whilst this share may seem negligible, so 9.8 starting off 7.5, when we consider the cumulative effects and the size of the budget, it is quite significant over time. And this is exacerbated by the fact that the size of the pie is not growing as fast as it previously did certain years time over time. It raises several questions about the adequacy and the implications for the intergovernmental fiscal system over the medium term with increasing pressures. Next slide, please. Now, this slide over here shows you the same as the previous slide, but also includes debt service costs. Now, as you all are very familiar with, debt service costs have significantly increased over time. In this particular period we're considering over here, it's almost doubling from 9% in 2008-9 to almost 18% in the outer year of the current MTEF. Now, given that these are shares of total expenditure, for one to increase, something else has to give in, or at least more than one needs to decrease. And the weight and the work over here is being done by provincial and national government. We see the allocation to national and provincial decreasing over this historical period over here, and a less optimal division of revenue once we consider a longer term period. Next slide, please. Finally, given what we previously showed, we now look at the division of revenue over time, both what was previously spent and what is allocated for the current MTEF, but on a real per capita basis. So that is to say, how much are we allocating, given the number of people in the country, removing the effects of inflation. So what we show over here with the orange line on the top of the graph is, for the most part, from 2008-2009, over the medium term and over the long term, the trend is for spending on a per capita basis to actually increase, controlling for inflation. Now, this is very important, and it shows that despite fiscal consolidation of the past 5-6 years, allocation per person in the country is actually increasing. But however, the devil is in the detail. When we look a bit deeper, we note that most of this is, or the largest part of the increase is for debt service costs. And national departments are growing more slowly, provinces growing more slowly, and yet local government grows a bit faster. When we consider the projections for the current MTEF, main budget expenditure on a per capita basis is expected to decrease in real per capita terms. And when we look at the right column on the table on the bottom, we note significant decreases on a per capita basis for national departments and provinces, and that's to allow for local government to increase in real per capita terms, and obviously debt service costs. Now, this raises questions about the appropriateness of the division of revenue for this country, especially given rising debt service costs and government's continued attempt to try and stabilize debt as a share of GDP over the medium term. Thank you.
Good morning, honourable members. In terms of the division of revenue, the national share of 67.2% includes conditional grants to provinces and local government, the general fuel levy, sharing with metros, debt service costs, the contingency reserve, and provisional allocations. The provincial share is 28.4% of the main budget expenditure, and the local government share is 4.4% of the main budget. Next slide. So subsequent to the initial division of nationally raised revenue, a portion of the national share is further divided amongst provincial government and municipalities. This division results in a remaining share of 49.6% for the national sphere, 41% to provinces, and 9.1% to municipalities. Of the 41% share in provinces, the equitable share amounts to 82%, and provincial conditional grants amounts to 17.8%. Of the 9% share to local government, the equitable share amounts to 58%, and conditional grants 31.9%. Metros also receive part of the fuel levy, which amounts to 10.2% of the local government share. To note, members, is that the division of revenue is not a total reflection of the expenditure on a local government level. Next slide. Members, as indicated, the 67.2% allocated towards the national sphere of government is further divided, and then 69% of the national share is transferred to other spheres of government and institutions. The table shows the departments that transfer about 50% of the share of the nationally raised revenue. Some of the biggest amounts are transferred by corporate governance, 95.4%, but that includes the local government equitable share that they transfer to municipalities. In terms of social development, they transfer almost the entire budget to SASSA. Human settlements transfer 97.1% and transport 97.9% of their national allocation. Next slide. Members, this slide only shows the transfers from national to provinces and local government. 11.5% is transferred to provinces in the form of conditional grants and 12.8% to municipalities, which includes the local government equitable share and conditional grants. Provinces receive 34.7% when the provincial equitable share is also included. Next slide. The total funding of 682.5 billion transferred to provinces in 2022 and over the medium term includes additional funding for teachers and learner support material. 15.6 billion is allocated to fund the COVID-19 responses and to reduce the effect of budget reductions on essential medical goods and services. Amounts are included to hire additional education and other assistance in schools, and it is also part of the Presidential Employment Initiative. 988 million is added to ensure the social welfare budget grows by inflation, and then additional funding is also added in 2022 to help fund the cost of the non-pensionable cash gratuity for employees from the 2021 wage agreement. Over the medium term, allocations to conditional grants also include additional funding for medical interns and community services doctors. It includes additional funding for the district health program to continue with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccinations. In 2022, additional funding is added also to for cash gratuity for employees, and 873 million is added to the Human Settlements Development Grant to rehabilitate houses, 471 million to the Education Infrastructure Grant to repair the schools, and 784 million to the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant to repair flood damages, specifically in KZN. Next slide. Members, this table shows the provincial conditional grant increases from 2021-22. The biggest increase is 1.3 million for the district health program grant and 1.2 billion for the human resource and training grant. The Human Settlements Development Grant receives an additional 853 million in 2022, and the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant is 680 million less than the revised estimate in 2021-22. Next slide. In terms of the local government transfers, changes has been made to the allocations, and it includes a 1.2 billion increase in 22 to the Municipal Infrastructure Grant, 838 million increase to the Public Transport Network Grant. This is a comparison from the 2021-22 financial year. Some of the amendments to the previous medium-term expenditure framework includes the local government equitable share. Everybody has mentioned that. And it has been increased by 4.2 billion in 22, 10.5 billion in 23, and 14.2 billion in 2024, specifically to expand the provision of free basic services to poor households. The Public Transport Network Grant allocations are reduced by 754 million in 2022 and 105 million in 2023, and it increases again in the outer year. These changes are made to align with the revised implementation plan of phase 2 of the My City project for the city of Cape Town. Next slide. So members, this is just a short narrative to show that while the budget of 2022 increases the local government equitable share by an average annual rate of 10.3%, it does not guarantee that the needs of indigent households will be sufficiently met. National transfers account for a relative small proportion of local government fiscal framework, and poor rural municipalities, however, receive most of their revenue from transfers. And research has also shown that the challenges faced by local government are systematic and are the direct result of the unrealistic assumptions that were made in designing the funding model in 1998 white paper on local government. Next slide, please. Members, this table is showing the total operating and capital revenue versus the operating and capital expenditure per item in local government. Just to mention that local government is self-financing or supposed to be self-financing, with operating revenue on average accounting for more than 85%. Service charges and transfers are the two main or the largest sources of operating revenue. A compensation of employees and contract services have increased over time as a share of expenditure. And some of the issues in municipalities that also has been mentioned is the growing grant dependency of municipalities, inadequate maintenance maintenance expenditure, outstanding consumer debt, and underpricing of services. Members, we also did a calculation in specific in terms of the consumer debt, and you must also realize that interest are added to this debt, and interest has actually grown by 8.83% between 2017 and 2021. Next slide. Next. Members, we thought it will add a bit of value if we also look at the roles and responsibilities in terms of the monitoring of the implementation of policies, budgets, and plans, which obviously also includes the implementation of the division of revenue. In terms of the DPME, they do monitor the annual performance plans through the QPR process, but there's no role for DPME with regards to the division of revenue. And specifically, we want to emphasize that there's a little monitoring of the performance outputs of conditional grants. We do monitor the expenditure, but all the emphasis is just on expenditure, but not on the real performance on conditional grants. The National Treasury has their responsibility in terms of monitoring and the development of different frameworks. And in terms of performance management of grants, it's not fully integrated into the standard systems that are provided in terms of the PFMA. Just also in terms of the division of revenue, the national departments must monitor information on financial and non-financial performance of programs partially or fully funded by the allocations in this Act. And just also to mention that in terms of the division of revenue, any monitoring program or system that is used to monitor information on financial and non-financial performance of a program partially or fully funded by a Schedule 4 allocation must not impose excessive administrative responsibility on receiving officers beyond the provision of standard management and budget information by compatible and integrated with and not duplicate other relevant national, provincial, and local spheres. In our latest analysis on conditional grants, members, we really found that when we received information from the National Treasury, we realized the huge administrative burden on departments to report on conditional grants. The report on health, for example, is almost 300 pages, and that is their responsibility on a quarterly basis. Next slide. This is just to show what is available in terms of quarterly information. This is an example of the Comprehensive Agriculture Support Program members. And just to show, if we use the Eastern Cape as an example, if you request this information, you will receive exactly what the performance on expenditure as well as performance outputs are. In the Eastern Cape, until September, they've spent 28% of this grant. They're projected to They projected that they will complete 80 projects, but they only completed 22. They estimated that they will support 2,300 beneficiaries, but they only supported 749. There were no targets set for support to farmers, but they supported 230, and the same 230 farmers also accessed markets. In terms of the target for job creation was 576, and they actually created 188. And then the last one, the number of visits, they estimated or planned to do 80 visits, but and none was actually done. Next slide. Members, in the previous discussion on the division of revenue, many questions related to getting an understanding of the criteria used for the allocation of the conditional grants. There was a lot of discussions in terms of this. So I found this very useful table on the Treasury website in terms of the public transport network grant. The table actually shows the cities that has an operational public transport system, the percentage that has been spent in 2020, the contribution from the property rates and also efficiency indicators of this transport systems at this stage. And if we just quickly look at George as an example, you will see that George does have an operating public transport system. They've spent 89%. They are eligible for incentives. 18% has been covered from direct costs, and then 5.1% of the population is using this, and they also spend 5% of their property rates revenue on the transport network. Next slide. Thank you, members. I will hand it over to our director.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, colleagues, for quick pushing through the slide. Thank you, Chairperson. I think we're done. This is just a summary slide just to emphasize that national departments are required to really monitor information on both financial and non-performance and non-financial information that are funded by DORA over time, and provide that information and as part of the side. The mandate of different spheres are addressed in the division of revenue, take into account various constitutional requirements and relevant up to relevant information. Again, we raise the issue of availability of useful information policy making. We're worried, we're concerned about unavailability of such information for policy making in particular. And of course, we highlight some of the changes that were effected in the current budget compared to the prior year. Thank you so much, Chairperson and other members. We now are ready for questions. There are extra slides just to provide more information in the national and both the spheres in this regard. Thank you so much, Chairperson and honored members. Thanks, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Finance, Team Treasury and Team PBO and Team FFC. My apologies about that. Thank you for the presentations, well informed. And now I will request members to raise their hands if they want to speak or engage on both presentations. And the Secretariat and colleagues will help me in identifying the hands. I have, just write your names down. Honorable Detroit, Honorable Okam, Honorable Ryder, Honorable Mletsani, Honorable Mkiva, Honorable Karim. Colleagues from the provinces, you can also indicate your interest. I see Mpumelelo's iPhone. Who's Mpumelelo? Lubabalo?
Honorable Saziwa from the Eastern Cape, Chairperson.
Okay, Honorable Saziwa. Who else? Okay. Thank you, honorable members. These are the only members that I could see. Honorable Duterte, you can start.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, I'll be brief. I know that these figures that are shown were determined on the revenue that has been collected, but I want to find out what is PBO and FFC's opinion with regards to what is going to happen henceforth with the effect of the Russian war, as well as the possibility of the fuel levy that might be amended. Now, it's evident that the spending of grants in provinces isn't taking place at the correct rate. I was actually shocked to see that Northwest again was underspending on the agricultural grants, and that's in spite of the fact that in previous years, some of those grants were actually applied to tend to other needs than it was initially provided for. So if FFC and PBO can maybe just elaborate on the impact that we might expect in the year that lies ahead. I know it's difficult and one doesn't want to make predictions, but it's evident that more job losses might occur. It's evident that more people will be dependent on municipalities and on government for assistance because the monthly expenses will just get higher. And then one thing that I noticed was the allocation for funds to support NSFAS was largely high. And it's common knowledge that the amount of dropouts that we have in tertiary institutions, TVET colleges, etc., is also quite high. And that's in spite of the fact that basic education is actually in need of funds. I just want an opinion from FFC and PBO if they might be of the opinion that more funds must be availed for basic education than higher education to ensure and see that children receive the necessary education, because they have lost about, some people say about 30% of the syllabus the past 2 years. If I can just have their view on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Duterte. Honorable Okamp.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, yeah, I would just like to find out what the opinion are of the whole effect that this war in Ukraine and obviously the related increase in cost for South Africans will be. We are seeing that fuel prices will go through the roof. All indications are that it might reach as high as 30 or even 40 rand per litre of fuel. Now, surely that hasn't been factored in when this budget was drafted and these allocations were made. But this will lead to municipalities and provinces having a higher cost expenditure on those items, especially if we also look at the effect that this will have on Eskom. Eskom relies a lot on diesel supply to have the country running on electricity. Now, it will have an effect, and we might even see more load shedding. This will have a huge effect on these municipalities where cost will increase and they have not been allocated money for that. What can we do to alleviate that problem? Our municipalities make use of a lot of fuel, and obviously this high increase has not been budgeted for or catered for. My other concern is that I do not see any relief or allocations higher than before for industries that also rely a lot on fuel. If you look at farmers, your input on farms heavily relies on fuel, and that will have a huge impact on food security in our country if that is not catered for and if alleviation is not provided for those industries. So I think that the agricultural sector especially, but also the manufacturing sector, where people are going to have a lot of troubles with more load shedding and with higher fuel costs, it will have a knock-on effect on unemployment in our country. It will have a knock-on effect on food security in our country. And I don't see that we are doing things that can alleviate that properly. So that would be my question. How can we do that, and how can we then assist these municipalities in that regard? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Ocamp. Honorable Ryder.
Good morning, Chairperson and colleagues. Thank you for the presentations to those that presented and took the time to put the information together. I'm going to start with the FFC, if I may. Mr. Tseng, you spoke about the inflation impact, and I think inflation was inevitable considering the economic stimulus packages that have been introduced around the world. Mr. Mkiva, if you can mute for us, please, if you wouldn't mind. So, yeah, I think the various economic stimulus packages that have been introduced around are bound to cause some inflation in the short term. And I think this has been exacerbated, and Vilja has just spoken about the war in Ukraine and the impact that's going to have on fuel prices and so on in the short term. Inflation outlook in the medium term. So when I say medium term, I'm talking about possibly 6 months hence and further. If you can maybe talk a little bit around that. And then, I want to tie. I really enjoyed FFC's presentation today, but I want to tie a whole bunch of things. So Mr. Jonas, the Sasha that gave us heart palpitations until she turned on her camera, and Eddie. I think everyone spoke about the fact that there's small increases in certain places. There's negative growth in allocations in others, and I think it was Eddie who spoke about the fact that if one considers the increases are below inflation or in line with inflation, it's actually zero growth that's happening. And I think that that's quite important. And Treasury put out an important indicator and signal to us in our discussions last week. And I spoke about the fact that there should not be an over-reliance in the allocation analyses on incrementalism. So what they were saying is that don't just look at taking last year's package and this year's package and saying, well, education's only increasing by X percent, 4.5% or whatever the case may be. That's incrementalism, and we're trying to move away from that. And I think that is welcomed, and I do believe that reevaluation of priorities needs to take place within every single department in the spending. And I noted that a lot of your analysis was based on incrementalism. So from the FFC's point of view, I'd just like to hear, in terms of reevaluation of projects, essentially zero-based budgeting. What have you seen happening in terms of the budget? Have you drilled down into departmental spend and had a look at the allocations on specific projects? Have you seen any benefits of the pilot project of zero-based budgeting so far? And I think that perhaps this was best shown, and I can't remember if it was Sasha or Eddie that highlighted it. In fact, it was Eddie. It was the housing, the Human Settlements Development Grant, where there's negative growth. But the fact is that I think that we've had strong signals from that department over the last couple of years that there will be a move away from providing top structures and a move towards providing site and service packages and providing people service stands so they can actually continue to develop on their own. So just on Mr. Jonas's presentation, I noted that you had the allocations by financial classification, but you didn't indicate very strongly on the infrastructural spend. Now, then I think Sasha and Mr. Tseng also brought a little bit of infrastructure information in. But very worrying in Mr. Tseng's presentation was the fact that over the medium term, I think that local government spending on infrastructural investment is reducing, in fact. And I think this is a very worrying picture, and the signal that was spoken about is very concerning, because we are supposed to, in terms of President Ramaphosa's ERRP, we're supposed to be looking, the economic recovery plan, we're supposed to be looking at an infrastructure-led recovery. And I think that those were quite concerning. Just on local government, I think that Mr. Tsing's comments about unspent funds and then returning funds is an incredibly important thing for this committee to note, and perhaps underlines our discussions yesterday, where we highlighted the need for the Auditor General to come in and present to us a little bit more quickly after the financial year end, so that we can evaluate and see where there are problems in terms of underspending or unspent funds that are returned to Treasury. I think that would be excellent. Then, yeah, number of people commented on the inflation-linked increase to the local equitable share, and saying, well, you know, it's a reasonably good sign. It's actually not. It's damn scary, because the reality is that if we consider that Eskom's, so what is equitable share for? It's there to fund the services to the poorer households. The fact is that those input costs are growing way quicker than inflation. So if you look at the increase that Eskom has signaled already, we are, you know, 9.something% way above inflation. If you look at the various water boards, I know Rand Water Board is proposing around 11%. I'm not sure where that's going to settle. I know that they normally send out a first warning shot, and then we settle at a slightly lower amount. But certainly it's above inflation. So increasing equitable share by anything less than the 10-11% that Eskom and the water boards are putting out there, because that ultimately is the biggest expense that equitable share is intended to fund. Any increase below 10-11% is actually not an increase, it's going backwards. And specifically, if we look at population growth, if we look at urbanization, you're going to end up with certain municipalities in a much more difficult position than they are right now. And let's face it, they're in a difficult position already. We heard about the fact that we've got so many unfunded budgets in local government. Efficiency of spend, Mr. Singh touched on. I think value for money is also an important comment, but I wanted to add that, you know, not only efficiency of spend, but you know, I don't want to say it too loud because she's next door, but my wife is very efficient at spending, but it's the value for money that one needs to interrogate. And then moving on to the FFC's presentation, I actually was very pleasantly surprised. Lots of good information that came out today. I'm not going to interrogate it very deeply, but I do just want to say I was prepared to write the PBO off this morning. But good information that came out of the presentations, good analysis, and a lot of food for thought. And I think very factual. So we will digest some of those numbers and charts. And I really appreciate the fact that there was so much information brought in and a much less controversial analysis. So thank you to the PBO for your efforts today. I thought I'd note that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ryder. The next is Honorable Muletsani.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me, good morning to honorable members and all the officials. Let me acknowledge both presentations. My question will go to PBO. In your slides, you mentioned that research by Public Affairs Research Institute found that over more than 2 decades, local government has not been able to fulfill their conflicting objectives, and their financial viability has suffered. Also taking into consideration that local government is playing a critical role as a first line of interaction between citizens and the government. Is the distribution model still relevant in resolving challenges of local government. That allocates around 9.1% of the budget allocation to local government. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Muletsani. Honorable Saziwa.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and the members of the committee and the FFC as well as the PBO. Chair, can I take off my camera now? Thank you, Chair. Chair, my first input will be based on the presentation by FFC. Of course, appreciating both presentations that are found to be empowering. Just on the presentation by FFC, the first area that I wanted to check with them would be the proper analysis of performance of state-owned enterprises that is regarded as being poor and very inefficient in financial performance. I want to check whether then what is the proposal that FFC has put forward in addressing this challenge. Whether part of that would be the rationalization of some of these state-owned enterprises. Also maybe changing their business models sometimes, whether in terms of scheduling of those state-owned enterprises, maybe from Schedule C to Schedule B and so forth and so forth. I think that's the first thing that I wanted to check with them. And if then they've made such proposals, what has been the reaction of the government, particularly from National Treasury in this regard? The second issue is what we all know, the ballooning, expenditure on compensation of the employees. Because this takes me back to 1996, when we had what was called the National Framework Agreement that talked to what form of a public service ought to have, what skills, what is going to be the size, and so forth and so forth. Therefore, in government, there are departments that are said to be labor intensive, like your education, your health. I'm just making this true. And therefore, in really that in those departments that are labor intensive, there's no way that you cannot have this, expenditure time not ballooning. But of course, also they need to observe the split of 85-15% in terms of your budget split. But has FFC then observed exactly at what salary levels are these, COE expenditure increasing? Is it the level of senior management or at what we can call the foot soldiers of such departments? And what are they suggesting going forward, Chair? Thirdly, I've seen that in terms of the current budget, there's been allocation given to Department of Basic Education to hire more educators. But however, another challenge that is there in education is the issue of infrastructure. We talk about poorly built schools, built through mud, through asbestos roofing, other zinc and so forth, some planks. Now, I've seen an absence of that in terms of the budget. Whether are they saying then, if there's been absent, it has been absent, have they seen any increase on the infrastructure, on education infrastructure grant that can offset what I'm seeing as as something that is missing in the budget by the National Treasury? The fourth area for FFC for me, Chair, would be, are there any proposals that FFC is putting forward in mitigating against economic growth projections not being met? Because as we have seen, they've landed in each and every slide that if these growth cannot be realized projections, chances are that departments will be under pressure. What proposals are they putting forward in mitigating against this? the last issue for them would be many of our municipalities, Chair, in particular those that are coming from poor rural areas, have low revenue generation prospects. And if you juxtapose those with their lack of capacity to spend grants, be it direct or indirect, therefore I wanted to check, is FFC observing the fact that our municipalities cannot be a size fits all? And that one of the reasons why some of them don't have chances of generating their revenues because of how they've been structured, which I usually call a collection of poverty. Well, what is the take of FFC around that observation that I've made? On the Parliamentary Budget Office, Chair, just for an update on the part of the Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature, is that we have passed the money bills and other related matters, and the Premier has already ascended. So we're in the process of rolling out, in order for us to have this Parliamentary Budget Office, so that we can be able, therefore, to interface properly with Treasury and all the departments in the province, Chair. Just for information, that one, Chair. Two last questions for them, for me, is that what is your take, PDO, on the fact that both two houses of parliament, national, that is National Assembly and NSOP, are governed by FIMBRA, but get assessed in terms of financial performance by through PFME, and that and also get funded by a respective department that ought to account to be oversighted by these two legislative arms of government. Because for me, if as parliaments and legislatures we oversight over the executive through that department, we're supposed to determine our own budget, of course, in line with the relevant legislation. But the issue of us being told that for your legislature, you are counted as one of the departments, yet you have to conduct oversight over the very same department that is going to say how much you have to get, which sometimes cuts on your ability to conduct, proper oversight because of lack of funding that is going to be enough. The last issue which I want to show the budget office is that I've seen, maybe you can respond to this, whether the issue of the implementation of national insurance and the budget that's supposed to go there has been part of the budget allocated to Department of, Health nationally. And whether within that budget, is there any focus that you've seen on developing permanent care as a way of rebutting such matters that become a burden on the Department of Health? Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Swaziwe. Very important issues there, and also giving other committees committees like Joint Committee on Financial Management on Parliament. So I think there's a lot to take into consideration there, and other relevant committees, but including this committee on appropriations and those in the NA as well. I will now request Honorable Mkiva to take the opportunity to make his comments.
No, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether I am visible enough. If maybe the network is not allowing, I will ask to switch off my video. I won't be long, Chair. I just wanted to check, Chair, that when it comes to rural development, if it were to be possible that we can actually quantify the percentage of the national fiscus that actually goes to rural development, particularly as it talks to infrastructure investment. I'm saying that simply because there's a huge backlog in terms of what is obtaining on the ground in rural communities. If we could be helped.
Maybe you may switch off the video We can't hear you anymore.
And now?
You have frozen. Honorable Mkiva?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you?
I can't hear you.
Okay, yeah. You can go on now.
Yeah. No, I had just wanted to talk to the issue of the actual spend that we put to the rural communities of the country, especially as insofar as infrastructure investment is concerned. If there was a possibility to quantify that in percentage form so that we sort of get a sense on annual basis as to what goes there in infrastructure development, whether it's grant or what is allocated in municipalities and the department itself that is responsible for rural development, so that we can be able to know exactly, paying attention to detail so that we can then make a proper assessment of the progress that we are making insofar as that is concerned. And then secondly, there's a saying that when you are confronted with a deeper crisis, you sort of have deeper opportunities equally. So we are in a state of financial dire straits as a result of the outbreak of COVID, which has led to us increasing our borrowings and increasing as well our expenditure. And then that manifests into the repayments that we have to pay, which have also increased. I just want to check with both FFC as well as the PPO. If we were to really meet our financial projection, what is it that we will have to do, which would be a game changer to deal with this pertinent situation in a manner that is extraordinary? Because my sense is that we seem to be so relaxed that we deal with this in a very ordinary way when I compare with the previous financial positions and financial accounts, that we are not dealing with this in a very robust and in a very revolutionary way so that we are able to turn around the situation. What is it that we have to do extraordinarily? Besides the issue of the borrowings. If I may make an example, for instance, other colleagues are referring to the issue here, but given what is happening with the intervention, with the military operation that the Russian Federation is doing in the Far East, it's going to impact on the oil prices and so on. And I think, for me, why can't we explore, for instance, a bilateral agreement between South Africa and Venezuela, wherein when President Hugo Chavez was here in 2008, he gave us a greenfield, as it were, to look at an oil block, which would give us a very cheap, access to crude. And given the fact that now ESCOM is burning a lot of diesel in order to keep the lights on, why can't we explore such things? Why are we always going with the flow instead of looking?
Honorable Mkiva?
You can no longer hear me.
We can hear him.
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay. I hope that you heard my last statement, Chair, as to why can't we explore some of the long-standing bilateral agreements, including that we have with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, wherein we're offered by that government a greenfield to explore so that we can have access to much more reasonable oil in terms of price, which would help us in many accounts to mitigate our challenges right now, including the fact that ESCOM is burning diesel to a greater extent to keep the lights on. So I'm saying that rather than relying on very excessive, expensive oil that we get elsewhere in Africa and the world, why can't we pursue that which is offered to us at a very minimal price, which would help us to mitigate our challenges in all fronts? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Mkiva. We lost each other somewhere towards the end, but I hope that other members and the colleagues on the platform were able to hear you. can I now request or allow Honorable Karim to take the opportunity to make his...
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Actually, we did hear, at least I did, everything Zolani said. I think maybe it's on your side. I gather from Dennis he did too. So anyway, Chairperson, I think on the last note from Comrade Zolani, maybe we should send him as our ambassador to Venezuela because he has been there. And we should ask him to do a report on his visit there, I think, as the poet. And in the cultural sphere, I think he went there. But on a more serious note, you know, I noticed it's interesting that it comes from the FFC, that on slide 30, is it? Yeah. Roman numeral 4, their position seems to be, unless I misunderstood it, that they support the decision to put more money into poor projects and in financing the economic, obviously, aspects of growth to the extent money will help in that regard. But they don't see it as they say, this is an approach that does not jeopardize the path to deficit reduction and fiscal consolidation, though they warn about the NSFAS increases, right? Because there will be a financial burden to bear for a long time to come. But it's nice to hear it from them because at least they are seen as more like, let's say, technical and neutral, and obviously they have more skills than we do as average MPs because people have been counterposing the two aspects. So it's good to see that. Then they say something on one of the slides, Chairperson, I can't recall, something about more significant structural reforms focused on artisanal skills, I think they said, to address unemployment. I think I know what they're saying, but maybe I don't. So maybe they want to help us to understand a bit more on what they're saying there. Then have they done work? I didn't pick this up. Maybe they have on the social or the BIG or whatever form of substitute will come for the SRD. Have they done any work in that regard? If indeed they have, why don't they let us have it and we can look at it and maybe get a briefing from them? Then I know there's all these consequences, negative, of course, with the Russia-Ukraine war. But now, you know, I also read, for what it's worth, that there are, on the other hand, not that it will make up for the negative consequences, obviously, but I'm just interested, does PBO FFC have anything to say? There's statements I thought I saw, which at least on the surface, to me at least, make some sense, that, you know, the price of coal will probably increase, which means our exports of coal will draw more revenue, and maybe other commodities too. Are there any positive sides to it? Not that the positive sides, Chairperson, can ever undo the horrendous consequences of what is happening, and the consequences, needless to say, disproportionately for the poor and disadvantaged. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Karim. I think I'm experiencing a problem in terms of the connectivity because even yourself, your last part, I could not. Oh God.
Zolani can chair, actually. I mean, if you get kicked out.
Can you hear me now?
Well, I can and Mr. Ida can.
Okay. I think I will have some few inputs before I allow FFC and PBO to come in. And I will first start by saying we all know that as per the declaration or the call by the president on the SONA, the priority of this government is to make sure that everything and anything we improve on the economy. So my question to both the FFC, having said that, and PBO, is what are the specific steps that needs to be taken by government to ensure the economic growth, to ensure that this economic growth returns to its levels before COVID-19, so that we as the Appropriations Committee can make an impact in advising and making sure that we play our role in assisting and advising the government to make sure that we can go back to pre-COVID-19. Do you see that possibility? What is your view in terms of that? And my second point is to both of you is that what impact will the current local government allocations? I know that most money has been allocated to local government. We are happy with that. But the municipalities that are in distressed, financial distressed, and those who have challenges in terms of the capacity, and those that have adopted the unfunded mandates, and those that owe ESCOM. Can you maybe assist us in terms of the allocation that has been increased to municipalities? How do you think will these municipalities, this allocation have a positive impact and will make sure that the end users or the beneficiaries do benefit from these allocation from Treasury? I also want to know your view in terms of the proposed shifting of the school backlog grant to education infrastructure grant, whether you think it's a good move or not. And if it's a good move, maybe a highlight to us, or if it's not, also highlight to us so that we can check the balances between the two views. And lastly, to also still to both PBO and FFC, I would like to know that what could be done to ensure that to ensure that the proper debt that we are facing as a country is being stabilized. Those are my few comments. I'm trying to manage the connectivity. I hope you have heard all my comment, and I will allow FFC to give responses and comment or advices in terms of our questions, and thank members for the good questions that they have put forward. And thereafter, PBO will follow while I still sort out my connectivity. Over to you, FFC.
Thank you, Chair and honourable members, for the very good questions. I shall give my first attempt at the macroeconomic and the dynamic responses thereof. Tricky one, but yes, Honourable Ryder mentioned about inflation. I want to draw Honourable Chair members your attention back to all the way our annual submission for 21-22. That would be 2 years ago. Back then already we were raising issues regarding inflation trends because obviously with COVID there was an initial drop-off, the decline in the rates of price increases. But through our research, we just want to again highlight here that when we delve deeper into decomposing and separating between core inflation, that it would be food, fuel, education, health, the basic, what we say, the necessities. The core inflation was actually higher than non-core. Non-core meaning things like alcoholic beverages and luxury related items, entertainment and that sort of thing. So that is one thing to watch now and back then, and also now as the inflation is also going through some volatility and choppy winds ahead, obviously due to the global as well as domestic factors. Which brings me then to this issue more international, I guess, external environments related. I think this would be a prime example, because asking about the impact of the conflicts in the Northern Hemisphere, is that this would be a prime example of how South Africa ended up in this catch-22 situation. And I want to draw refer you to, Honorable Chair members, to our redemption schedule for our debt. You will see that in the majority of it, if not all, I think there is only one redemption that is still denominated in Japanese yen, but the majority of it is in US dollars. And meaning that we need to pay back in terms of redeeming our debts, our sort of past sins, if you like, in fiscal terms, in the US dollar. So we can't sever our relationships. We can't not maintain that relationships in terms of redeeming our debt. And so essentially, that is our relationship requirement, if you like, with the Western countries. And that also means then about our relationship with the East. Well, most of our imported goods are from the East. So in terms of trade terms and in terms of industries, because most of what we import, machineries and so forth, are physical capitals, machineries that is required, in conjunction with our labor inputs to make the economy grow and produce. So really, and here I want to say that the Commission does not express itself on either side of this conflict issue, but what we would I would like to highlight, using this as a prime example, is how one may find itself in such a precarious situation where we can't be falling on either side of this argument. And that is a really unfortunate situation to be in, because it means essentially that South Africa as a country can't take on a position internationally at its own will. So that is one thing to watch out for. And then that also means, again, politics drives economics. So with that bind, if you will, constraints and that either side we can't fall on, that means that we also, from it, say there's an external impact. What can we do about it? Means that nothing really, very little, because of these two forces at a collision course of each other. The next point I'd like to bring in is infrastructure spend. Honorable Chair members, at our briefing to the Standing Committee on Appropriations, so it is good to also see that both houses essentially have their finger on the right pulse, on the same pulse, is infrastructure spend. Our answer to it is, one thing to note is that infrastructure spend for different spheres have different purposes. We highlighted at that briefing last week to the Standing Committee, where we say that if you pull up the actual spending and really go down to where did the money go for infrastructure spending, you'll see that for national government, it would be more for things like administrative building, because remember that for most of the concurrent functions, national designs, policy, and then the provinces or subnational spheres and local government implement. And then for provinces, it would be about more social services infrastructure, right? Schools and things like that. And then finally, local government would be more about basic services, water, electricity, refuse and that kind of thing. And roads, sort of cross-sectional, you will find roads spending, there's the provincial revenue, the provincial road maintenance grants. And then if you go to the local government, there is also the, both side of this little urban development grants, and then the metro road infrastructure and investment there. So what we are saying is that it's very, one has to be wary of aggregating all of them and summing them all up to one bundle and call it infrastructure, right? So sometimes when we say national infrastructure spend, so remember that some of the spending actually is through also things like the Central and other sort of entities that spends and that actually builds and spends those infrastructure. So it's very complex, and it's not something that simply we see the aggregate number going down. We think that that means that we are not investing. And also then lastly to the spending, sort of budgeting to spending issue, specifically on also the touching on the HSDG, Human Settlement Development Grants, and the residuals as surplus thereof. Honourable Member Ryder, you picked on the right grant actually to serve as an exemplar for this. HSDG used to be the grant money that circulates between national provinces and local governments in terms of spending and cash liquidity residuals. How does it happen? Well, national obviously allocates HSDG to provinces. Provinces, some of them, then they will engage in this sort of who is doing top structure and who is doing the bottom, the base or the land issue. And obviously when it comes, and then it engages in this sort of who is building the house, it's a question. And then invariably, there was always money left over in between the three spheres because of different financial years reporting and also when these houses are built. So for many, many years, it really, HSDG is essentially went into this sort of tumble dryer situation where money just gets recycled over and rolled over and retained within provinces over many, many years. And so this reduction now that we see is actually reasonable in the sense that that it's through those many years of expenditure review that we find that actually this money could be better spent elsewhere because we always keep on sitting with these residuals. And that whole thing sort of relates to this whole sort of zero-based budgeting. Currently, government in South Africa, we don't, when we say zero-based budgeting, one should think in terms of, well, carrying from revenue side to budget, right? Because zero-based means revenue equals expenditure, or at least in that direction. But that's not how the whole budgeting process works. If you attend and pay attention in these TCF budget forum and budget council meetings, is that they budget from expenditure side. And the way they do it is they take the bottom line of the expenditure and then they apply first the inflation adjustments percentage to it, and then also devise, while credit be granted, is that they also think about what does that mean for the expenditure ceiling, and then it's always that pull and the pull, but pull and the push. But at the end, if you go back and look at what does zero-based budgeting mean in its truest sense, it should have been that we budget from what we have, not what we spend, using a lot of money that is borrowed. Also, Honorable Mkiva said regarding the crisis and the opportunity parity, I couldn't agree with you more, honorable member. Yes, a great crisis does present great opportunities, but also taking into account that catch-22, the squeezing from both sides question that I mentioned earlier regarding what is our position and therefore the economic impact of the Northern Hemisphere and where do we look. So I want to say, why not Venezuela? It depends on what we gain in return, apart from oil, because it wouldn't help us either if we sort of upset other parts of other aspects of our international relations. But all of that, I would also like to add on is this relationship that it should be justifiable for South Africa to really challenge this concept is our relations with rating agencies. Only after this conflict in Northern Hemisphere started that the Russian sovereign debt is downgraded to junk. But you remember that our status, was already junk from at the beginning of the COVID onset. So there is, I think there is points to debate about the unfairness in this. Are we saying that we are worse off than than a country in conflict? I think this is something that so from a balanced perspective, and looking across the global economy and as well as the fiscal environment and relations, is I think there is we were a bit unfairly treated in that respect, especially from the ratings agencies. But that's another negotiation or debate to be had between Treasury as well, between us and the rating agencies. Lastly, regarding Honorable Karim's points, what are the structural? I think it's all in our also introductions to the Joint Committee, including of this committee, is that those labor rigidities, our structural reforms, especially to do with something that's important as ESCOM. I mean, it's been years that we've been talking that we're since 2006-07 already when the first instance of these rolling blackouts started, as well as our big research. Our research only, as the Commission has tabled in its annual submission, is we draw attention to two major limitations to this particular issue. One is comprised of one being the dynamic response of the markets or household behavior to such a grant, and the fiscal implications thereof. Second is that the implementation limitations, that's how that those two we can't model. Okay, well, we haven't modeled. And I think that those two limitations together builds towards our position taken at the big, and which all boils down to this R word, unspoken, sort of unspoken R word, the reprioritization. South Africa, we actually do have the money. I mean, the tax revenue is 25% of GDP. You have, a big and very and historically been quite efficient government, but recently deteriorated much too quickly for the good of the people. So we really think that it is a problem about a question about reprioritizing the money that is left sitting redundant, that went on the irregular expenditure, went on the wasteful expenditure. We are looking at 177 billion, standing corrected, according to AGS's last audit. and 2 or 3 billion wasteful, identified wasteful and frivolous expenditure. So that's the money, and not forgetting that is not that hasn't counted in all the surpluses and cash residuals and that's money sitting idle in provincial revenue fund or local governments' bank accounts. And so all of those together really suggest that there is a path, there is a viable path for South Africa to reprioritize it and make itself more efficient in terms of not just spending, as Honourable Member Solomon said, but the value, improve on that value of spend. Thank you, Chair. That's that's our answer to the questions. I hope that suffices.
Chairperson, should we continue?
Yeah, you can continue, my brother. Carry on.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much for the input, for the questions. There are quite a lot of questions. At first, I thought it sounds as if we are discussing the fiscal framework, but I think it's important points that came in because we're also looking at the fiscal framework for provincial and local government. I'll quickly go through some of the points, and then I want Dr. Mohammed to also come in around the discussion about macroeconomic issues that were raised by the committee. Just the first point, we will be issuing our economic brief, Chair and members, later in the day, which we try to highlight some of the earlier signs of the implications for Russia and Ukraine on our macroeconomic. But I think on some of the implications for public finances and some of the earlier signs, it's still a moving target, but there are already signs that there will certainly be impact in households, in economy, and also some of the issues. I mean, one of the issues that we've seen over 2 weeks' time, already the wheat price has increased by 60%, and we know what does that mean for bread and some of the related products. We've seen the price of oil pushing quite up, and I think in our brief on fiscal framework brief to the committees, we did highlight that already there are also some of the potential gains when you look at some of the minerals, I mean some of the mining extracted minerals we have to export, where if sanctions are imposed on Russian and some of those, we like to see export increasing in our economy, which leads more which could lead to increasing the tax base in the mining sector. So there are some mix in that regard. But I think in our economic brief, which will circulate later, I would like to draw members to really look into it and some of the specific inputs that we think will support, will give members information in terms of what are some of the likely implications of the conflict in the Russian and the Ukraine there. And the second point, it's really around the institutional incrementalism that was raised by on the right there. It's a very interesting point, really, because my view, I think I agree that there's a lot of focus on the numbers in the country really takes us away from really issues that are affecting our society and economy in this regard. And my wish is to really get to a point whereby we focus really on the outcomes of spending or the budget as a whole, or the fiscal framework outcomes. In our analysis, we start by showing the needs of the society and economy, which are to be addressed by some of the allocations. And for us, that's very important. The budget has to be seen within those boundaries on realizing the constitutional requirements and constitutional provisions we set out ourselves for as a country, but as a society also, and then moving away from rents and cents and so on, because that doesn't really help us, because we've done so much rents and cents over the past few years, but if not be still going to realize some of the developmental indicators we've set ourselves in the National Development Plan, the Constitution, and so many other, because we're focused a lot on the rents and cents post, which is important. I'm not saying it's not important to focus on that, but equally, it's not an end, it's an end itself. The end itself has to be realizing the developmental outcomes, which also enable us to deal with some of the efficiencies within the system. The point around the social wage, I mean, coming back to the point raised around the local government exemption, I think the emphasis we make there, Honorable Letani, is really in the fiscal framework discussion, there was debate around the issue of 60% that's been spent social wage. And our emphasis was to say how much of that really goes to where it is supposed to be going. And our argument, the analysis based on the research done by a reputable institution, really talks to that point to say you have 10 million households who are eligible to support on these allocations, but the money goes to support 3 million households. And clearly that shows that at times, in many instances, quite evidently, the funds get redirected to where they're not supposed to go. Hence, we see some of these needs ever perpetuating. And I think from oversight perspective, both the provinces and the local governments, it's important to understand that the implications of redirecting funds for what they intended for, particularly the indigent policy, is not going to realize that you're not going to deal with some of these issues. Again, it raises the issue of what really capacities are there to realize those mechanisms if funds are redirected where they're not supposed to be. Redirected to where they're supposed to be. The point I'm going to quickly jump around because now so that I can give other colleagues some time. The issue around what should we do, Chair, to get growth going. It's a very important point because I think what I've done recently, I looked at the South Africans, our macroeconomic performance and outcomes for the past year since 1994. But largely trying to look at what has been the role of government in those periods from 1994 until 2019, and also trying to raise the questions around what does it mean post the COVID-19, what economic planning thinking should really be about. And there's a particular period which I want to draw the committee to, which is between the 2004 and 2008 period. Why? But that's when the time where we've seen real a growth of around 4.8% in the economy, also including a growth per capita of around 3% or 2.5% on average over the time of the period. And again, it's a time where we've seen, the period before then where we've seen an increase in employment to 8 million from 4 million. But it's a time when during that period where we've seen actually the unemployment is reducing by 3 million, or the economy creating almost 3 million jobs within that period, declining from what it has escalated in previous period towards that time. And the interest rates, the real interest rate, nominal interest rates had also declined quite heavily during that time where we've seen the nominal interest rate was sitting at 17% around period before then, and it came quite strongly down to around 12%, and real interest rate came down from 8.5% to 4.8%. And it's again particularly around that time when we look at public investment. Let's take government final consumptions grew on average and grew on per year by 4.8%. Clearly, there was a lot of role played by government tried to push that growth, focusing, scrutiny, zooming again on the public investment, which increased by 15% or so within that period. Looking at general government investment increased by 11% per year, but also public corporations coming into the party by increasing the investment, the real investment economy by 19%. And certainly that period really, we've seen a lot of jobs created, and that's when real estate played an important role. And coming back without really echoing myself, echoing what I often say a lot of times, clearly, in our presentation raised before, the reason why I also show this trend is very important to understand that all spheres of government has a role to play in pushing public investment in the economy, and understanding that decline of investment leads to actually worsening of the economy and so on. And really, that period of 2004 and 2008 really is seen as a very expansionary macroeconomic policy period of what we had in our economy. And again, I'm saying this because we need to understand that each and every sphere has a role that it plays within that time. And one of the points that we've raised again around how do we get economic growth, how we get economy to grow beyond where to get its potential is really an issue of importance of understanding the need to have a structural transformation economy. Use a fiscal policy really to support the private sector economy. Look at manufacturing, look at agriculture. It saddens me when you see there isn't actually much spending in, there's underspending in agriculture, and it has a very important role where you are able to see heavy value add taking place in such areas. So it's very important to have that understanding that we have to move our economy very much towards a more structural transforming the economy to be more supporting the productive sectors of the economy. And I think there's a due shared even in government. I know Minister of Finance said that before, and it has to be realistically seeing the numbers really pushing us towards that space. The last point before I give my team around the money bills, I agree with the chairperson, Honorable Swazio from SNK. The money bills, it's an issue that really sits with the committees and in that regard. But I think the questions around whether the FMPLA or whether the budget in Parliament is funded sufficiently, we have done some analysis over time, and which we'll share with some of the colleagues earlier, where it's worth looking at that. The Money Bills Act does give the legislature powers to really dictate or determine in terms, and hence we're discussing now how much each sector or sphere has to get as allocated budget in that regard. But our understanding, there has been discussion currently through the executive authority and the speaker yesterday in the House discussion. There is quite clear indication that there are conversations around that, and to provide Parliament with much or to actually retake the role that Parliament has been given by the Constitution in that regard. And the discussion around national health insurance, we will be looking into that later. We have done some analysis, but I think we'll rather provide more, more thoughtful analysis in that regard. I think I'll stop here and give Dr. Mohammed just give talks around the macroeconomic issues, and then give Dr. Orlandi. And just before I give Dr. Mohammed, I know he'll talk to this as well. The issue around, we already had inflationary pressures even before the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. Look at the input costs globally, but also there's a lot of pressure before then. And this certainly would likely to put more pressure on the inflationary in that regard. But again, let me leave Dr. Mohammed to talk to those issues, and we'll take other colleagues coming in. Dr. Mohammed, if you want to come in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jantjies. With your permission, Honourable Chair. They're really big issues, and I think the one thing, just to check, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. I just wasn't sure if you could hear me. We've come through periods of lots of uncertainty. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the poor recovery since then, the COVID, and now this war, and we keep hearing about increasing risk from environmental issues. And so I think the one thing we need to realize is that, we're facing a future, and this is something we've covered in a few of our past presentations on budget and MTPPS, where we need to understand the risks from geopolitical, from environmental, from the financial instability that arises as well. And so we're seeing, a lot of what's been happening as responses to those. And I think central to part of my understanding and looking at the macroeconomic situation is the increased role that the financial sector and financial markets play within the global economy, and how interrelated we are. And you see that the major way in which the Western countries or a lot of the world is dealing with Russia and its invasion of Ukraine is through putting in place sanctions and sort of saying you can't use the SWIFT system and other payment systems globally, and to cut them off, and also to cut them off from some of the reserves that they have in other countries as well. But this interrelatedness means that, say we talk about what is the risk to South African food security. Now, South Africa produces enough food for ourselves. In some years, we can produce extra, but you know, we just to make the point as well, you know, the Stats South Africa makes the point a lot, and I want to repeat it, is that at a national level, we have food security, but at a household level, we don't have food security. And here the issue of inflation and inflation in food prices makes a difference. And so the role that government plays in terms of ensuring that certain increases in food prices aren't passed on to households, particularly poor households, or in offsetting that the impact of that. Also, so it's in terms of fertilizer. We import about 11% of our fertilizer from Russia, but what the World Bank and the IMF and other people doing research on these matters show is that there's a correlation between fertilizer prices globally. There's a correlation also because a lot of grains and other foods, basic foods, are sold on forward markets, it's become to some extent a financial asset. The derivatives based on these prices, the same goes for oil. These prices become correlated around the world. So once there's a problem somewhere and the price is pushed up, it affects all of us. And so we need to also think about this in terms of how we respond in terms of interest rates to inflation increases. Are we responding to outside factors that have nothing to do with demand and the low levels of aggregate demand in the South African economy, or are we responding to actually, you know, the demand pool but from within the economy? So just on fertilizers, we've seen big increases in fertilizer prices since 2021. The maize board, for instance, has warned about this several times. And one of the things that's helped us is exchange rates. And so the exchange rate and how the rand is traded in global financial markets, which is often out of our hands and often not linked to the fundamentals in the South African economy, because it's also affected by what's happening globally and whether, people operating in these short-term markets are chasing rands in currency markets, or they're chasing rubles or Turkish lira or whatever, and how they're managing their portfolios. So they may be moving out of the ruble now and moving into the rand, and the rand's maintaining a level of 15, but that could change very much. We also don't know how long the war's going to be. This morning I was reading that there seems to be a bit of optimism on the side from Ukraine to say that Russia seems to be wanting to be more open to some things in the negotiations and is not making basically Ukraine declaring that they've lost the war as one of the conditions, for instance. So we don't know how long this war is going to last. We also don't know what the impact's going to be in terms of oil and gas production, as Ukraine is a major exporter, but also how quickly Russia is going to be pulled back into the production and providing that, and what the oil price will be. So as my director said, you know, this is a moving target, and to add to that, there are lots of moving parts. My approach here is to say that we are going to see inflation in South Africa, but we should also be managing inflation. And part of my response also would be to Mr. Ryder's point about inflation being caused by fiscal stimulus. Now, you know, there is a relationship between the fiscal stimulus in the developed countries and increasing demand for certain goods there. But there's also a lot of the inflation that we've seen across important parts of, say, in the US, have been coming on for a long time. And so things like cost of education, cost of health, cost of housing, and again, because fertilizer prices have been increasing everywhere, food prices also over a period of time have been increasing in the developed countries as well. What happened with the pandemic is that it's actually affected supply chains, it's affected the number of people working in certain sectors, and so it's pushed up those prices even further. what's also happened is that the firms that have struggled, especially large corporations that dominate certain markets in food, in oil, and others, have taken this opportunity to increase their prices and using inflation as an excuse because they've actually suffered declining sales, or some of them have anyway during the pandemic period. So there's several reasons for that, but also looking at the US market particularly, there are people arguing that, you know, they saw a big increase in car prices and house prices during the pandemic, and also when people got more money from the government stimulus and things. But because it seems to be there's some settling down in certain of those value chains, and also more intervention by governments in trying to manage rents and house prices. So they may be turning a corner, and that may be not adding as much to inflation as well. So we need to keep watching the space, and also we need to be careful in making that direct relationship between government social expenditure and social security, and increasing social security expenditure and inflation, and understanding that. And also, I think, as my colleague from the FFC said, we need to actually look at the different products and the prices. So yeah, I mean, I'm not giving a clear answer, and as I was saying, there's lots of uncertainty and lots of moving parts, but if necessary, I can come in and talk a bit more about that and the macroeconomic impact. I mean, I think overall, just in terms of South Africa and South Africa's GDP, there may be a few points shaved off this year because of the war, and because of that, the impact on prices and value chains, and the ongoing problems with value chains. But again, we can't predict the severity at this point, and we haven't actually seen projections from any of the international organizations and others yet to provide those figures. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there still another member of the team, PBO, that wants to come in?
Yes, thank you, Honourable Chairperson. I will be quick. I can respond to Honourable Ryder and also perhaps Honourable Oukamp in terms, I'm just so glad that we are moving away from just looking at incrementalism, because if you go back and you will check all our previous analysis of the budget, we always focused on the change from the previous year to the next year. And that is almost one of the first things that you consider when you determine your budget for the following financial year, is basically to look at the ability to spend in the current year and the ability to perform. So if you cannot perform and you cannot spend, then that should be the criteria or the basis for your next year's budget. And then you can go forward into the medium term or the 2 outer years, just adding your estimated CPI. So I'm really pleased in terms of that. And you will always see in some instances, especially now, we saw increases of between 2 and 6% from last year to this year. And that is basically because a certain grant might have not performed, not financially, but also not in terms of outputs. And then, Honourable Mkiva, you asked whether it is possible to do analysis on spending in rural areas. It is possible. The data is there. It's just so overwhelming because we have about 30 grants, 41 votes, 9 provinces, 257 municipalities. So if you can identify the province and the municipalities, it is possible to draw that information from the database of the Division of Revenue and do the calculations if you want us to do that. In terms of Honourable Chairperson, you said, what can this committee actually do? In provinces, there's a huge role for provincial treasuries in terms of local government and in terms of their role in, with regards to the implementation of the MFMA. There's also a huge role for provincial local government departments, and they the provincial treasuries needs to make sure that those budgets are credible and that allocations from provinces or from national departments does not lose its identity in those budgets. And then obviously they also have a role in terms of monitoring, and it's not logically or it's not possible for this committee to have hearings or discussions with each and every municipality, but it is possible to have discussions with provincial local government departments and also local provincial treasuries to report back or to provide analysis of those budgets and monitoring of those budgets. There was another question in terms of whether we agree that the two education infrastructure grants are combined. I personally are in favor of simplify the grant system, because at this stage is very complex. There's a lot of grants, there's a lot of duplication within grants, and it creates a huge administrative burden on provincial departments, on local government, as well as in terms of the reporting function to the National Treasury, and also that gap that we do not really get reports on the performance of the local the conditional grants. We basically just get information on the expenditure. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues will want to come in, but if not, then we are done. Our director has gone to the other meeting and he asked me that we can just conclude. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you, Anelia and the team. Thank you very much, Team PBO, Team FFC. Can I check members if they want to have a second bite, not really being long in that? Are we fine with the responses that we got from both institutions? Honorable members, are we fine?
Yeah, we are very fine, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kiva. I see Honorable Dutoit is also fine. Thank you, Team PBO and FFC. We always appreciate your presence and your guidance. Your views are taken very serious by this committee. They help in empowering us. Thank you so much. We, as the committee, we are to deal with a set of minutes of the meeting that took place on the 9th of March, 2020. We can allow PBO and FFC to leave the platform if, because now we are dealing with committee matters. Honorable members, can you see the minutes on the screen?
Chairperson, quite very clearly.
Yes, Honorable Dutoit. Just wait, Lubabalo, wait. Honorable Dutoit.
I was responding to your question, Chair. It is visible.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, let's go on. For page 2. And 3. And 4. Members will stop us if there's anything that they identified that they want to change or tweak. Page 5. Page 6. Hope we are not too fast. Page 7. Page 8. And page 9. Honorable members, this is the last page of our minutes. Can I get a mover for the adoption of the minutes as a true reflection of the discussions for the meeting?
I move, Chairperson. Eunice, move.
Thank you. Yes, Honorable Mkiva.
Yeah, I want to second the mover and say that you can go ahead and sign on the dotted line.
Ndiyabulela, Honorable Mkiva, I will sign as the committee has adopted the minutes. With that, honorable members, and we have come to the end of our meeting. I want to thank you very much for your inputs, your participation in the meetings. We learn from each other every day, and I really appreciate from the chairperson's point of view. I'm appreciating your participation in the meeting. Thank you so much. There's another meeting in the NCOP that is taking place. I hope members will still have time. We finished before 12. We'll find time to join that meeting. Thank you so much, honorable members. Keep well and take care.
Thank you, Chair.
Long live the chair.
Keep well, bye-bye.
Long live, long live, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you so much.
Long live.
So, thank you, Wekaya. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Estelle. Thank you, Lomo. Thank you, Lubabalo. I see somebody by the name of Neo. Thank you, Neo. Thank you, Sephora. Thank you, Tyra, PMG. Thank you, IT, Parliamentary TV as well. Thank you very much. I'm out.
Bye-bye.